Pedro Munhoz versus Sean O'Malley takes place this weekend on the main card of UFC 276, Adesanya versus Cannonier, and I can't wait for the Sugar Show to return against his most dangerous test of his career so far in Pedro Munhoz, a guy who has fought the who's who of the bantamweight division, a top 10 mainstay over the past however many years it's been. Pedro Munhoz is a true top bantamweight veteran that's still got it. Of course, his last few fights haven't been the best. We'll talk about that in a second, but Pedro Munhoz, I mean, I'll go through his resume to start this prediction video off. Dominic Cruz, Jose Aldo, Jimmy Rivera, Frankie Edgar, Aljamain Sterling, Cody Garbrandt, John Dodson, Brett Johns, underrated in my opinion, Rob Font as well, like Jimmy Rivera again before that, Rafael Assunção, earlier in his career in his UFC debut. I mean, this guy really has taken on everyone there is to take on, and if you look at some of his fights that he's had, Dominic Cruz recently, of course, Dominic Cruz was able to get it done, but he dropped Dominic Cruz in the first round and had a really good first round against Dominic Cruz. Won that round very, very clearly. Dominic Cruz rallied in the later rounds to get things done. The Jose Aldo fight, he looked good in the first round, but Jose Aldo has found himself a new lease of a career in the bantamweight division, and he's been doing great as well, so he even came back in those last two rounds. He beat Jimmy Rivera very convincingly in an amazing fight where he chopped up the legs of Jimmy Rivera. Another thing we're going to talk about in today's video, because of course that seems to be the only noticeable weakness you can find in Sean O'Malley, is that sometimes if you kick his legs, things can happen. So that is obviously something people are going to point towards. Frankie Edgar split decision. I truly believe this is one of the most brutal robberies in the past decade of the UFC. He clearly beat Frankie Edgar 4-1, but no one said anything about it because they were so desperate for Frankie Edgar to finally get a win in his career again, rather than falling down a downward spiral. I mean, that was a really bad robbery. I had him winning 4-1 against Frankie Edgar. Even still, Aljamain Sterling, he beat Garbrandt in the first round. He beat Brett Johns, who's a really good opponent as well, and he beat him dominantly and beat him up over 3 rounds. John Dodson stuff. Rob Font, a top guy in the bantamweight division now. Pedro Munhoz dropped him, put him in a guillotine, and finished him in the first round as well. I mean, these are some really good opponents, so if Sean O'Malley can put himself amongst the winners that can actually beat the level of Pedro Munhoz, now we can start having the conversations about Sean O'Malley versus some top 5 bantamweight opponents. But I'd say this is the toughest test in terms of how his opponent is perceived before the fight happens. Of course, Marlon Vera might be a more dangerous opponent than Pedro Munhoz is now. However, at the time that Marlon Vera took on Sean O'Malley, he was an up-and-coming, unranked guy himself. It was him versus Sean O'Malley to decide who was going to get a top 10 opponent next. And Marlon Vera got the job done. He was losing the fight to begin with. Sean O'Malley was on another level, schooling Marlon Vera on the feet. I know people don't like it when I say this, but I'm just trying to be as honest as possible. Sean O'Malley was schooling Marlon Vera on the feet, absolutely beating him apart. Leg kicks, body shots, head shots as well. And then Marlon Vera, at one point in the fight, landed a perennial nerve kick. He was throwing a leg kick. Sean O'Malley brought his leg out of the way to dodge the leg kicks, and Marlon Vera's big toe hit the perennial nerve of Sean O'Malley, shut down his foot. Then Sean O'Malley continued to outstrike Marlon Vera, even whilst on one leg, and he rolled his ankle a couple of times, but he was still outstriking Marlon Vera, even on one leg, and eventually he stepped backwards in a funny way, snapped his ankle a little bit, fell on the ground. Marlon Vera got on top, landed a few big elbows, and got the TKO win, which is still a TKO win, in all honesty. So the damage is still done. It doesn't matter how it happened, you did get TKO'd. So that chin is going to have taken that damage. You can't tell your chin, well, it was only a perennial nerve kick. Like, the chin's going to be like, dude, I got fucking put out cold. Like, I don't really care if it was a perennial nerve kick or not. Like, the chin's still going to take that damage. So I feel as though Sean O'Malley's going to get this win over Pedro Munhoz. Pedro Munhoz is 35 years of age. The reach difference in this fight is alarming, to say the least, because normally the higher the weight classes go, the more kind of variance there is in sizes of opponents, and like the more reach difference there's going to be. Like, you see Adesanya has a massive reach difference over Robert Whittaker and stuff like that. But at bantamweight, normally they're all around the same area. You know what I'm saying? They're like 4 inches apart in reach or something like that. But Sean O'Malley has a 7-inch reach advantage over Pedro Munhoz. A massive height advantage as well, which is a massive deal because he throws a lot of front kicks, a lot of teeps, a lot of spinning back kicks, a lot of leg kicks of his own, and that's going to give him a huge advantage there as well. I think Sean O'Malley and Marlon Vera have the longest legs per person in the UFC. This was something they kept mentioning during their first fight they had against each other. Marlon Vera, Sean O'Malley, they both said, I think John Anik said on the mic, amongst his other random facts that he brings up in the middle of a fight, he said that they measured the leg length, and per size of a fighter, him and Marlon Vera have the longest legs. And that's going to be a big deal when it comes to getting out of the way of leg kicks of Pedro Munhoz and landing his own leg kicks as well, which I think are very underrated. He was spinning Marlon Vera around with leg kicks. He always lands really good ones. Of course, when he's got an opponent trying to take him down, he's going to be a little bit more hesitant to throw them, so he throws a lot of feints beforehand, before he sets him up. Very Israel Adesanya-ish, but he's just so much quicker, of course, at bantamweight. I feel as though he's going to beat Pedro Munhoz. I don't think he's going to KO Pedro Munhoz, though. That's my take. He's looking for a KO. He said, like, on his Instagram, who's going to catch Munhoz's head in the crowd, and I'm going to take out Munhoz. First round KO, UFC 276, and he's got to be in that mindset, and if he does finish Pedro Munhoz, it really does say a lot about his power, because Munhoz, again, has fought a lot of heavy hitters in the bantamweight division, and they haven't really been able to do anything to him in terms of, like, rocking him or hurting him. I mean, I don't even think he's ever been dropped in his career as far as I can remember. So, Sean O'Malley putting out Pedro Munhoz would be a hell of a statement, but I feel as though he's going to win this fight 30-27. The third round gets a little bit interesting. Pedro Munhoz starts landing some shots here and there, maybe landing a couple of leg kicks, but I think he's going to be too beaten up in the first two rounds to really make something happen, and Sean O'Malley's going to be chopping at his legs. I think he's going to beat Munhoz to the leg kicks. He's got that range advantage. He's got the height advantage. He can play on the outside and find the legs of Pedro Munhoz, go to the body on Pedro Munhoz as well. Pedro Munhoz is a very, you know, short and stocky wedge of a man. You know what I'm saying? Like a mini fridge type build. He's got that kind of a bantamweight Gastelum vibe to him. I would say really tough chin, really stocky body, really big torso. That's going to be open for all those spinning back kicks from Sean O'Malley to the body with the teeps and the front kicks as well. He finds range with the front kick every single fight that he has. Some teeps to the body too. And I just don't feel as though Pedro Munhoz is big enough or rangy enough to make O'Malley pay when he's throwing those kicks at range, because Marlon Vera could maybe. Like when O'Malley went for him, he kicked O'Malley's leg afterwards because he was still big enough and rangy enough to be able to land those shots just at the tip of the toe on the leg. Whereas Pedro Munhoz, O'Malley's going to find it easier to slide out the way of that leg kick. He's going to find it easier to throw a kick of his own and not really feel any punches coming back his way. And I think Sean O'Malley has kind of taken this fight against Pedro Munhoz and sort of sought out Pedro Munhoz as an opponent, because Dominic Cruz is very similar to Sean O'Malley. And Munhoz couldn't beat Cruz. And I think O'Malley believes that I'm quicker than Cruz. I'm more powerful than Cruz. Munhoz has to look out for way more than he does against Cruz. I'm taller than Cruz. I'm younger. I'm more improving. He arguably believes he's better than Cruz at everything that Dominic Cruz does. Dominic Cruz is a little bit more unorthodox with what he does, so it's a little bit tricky to get a read on him. But Sean O'Malley, rangier, faster, more powerful. These things I don't think can be denied. I don't know who'd win in a match, but I actually would pick Sean O'Malley to beat Dominic Cruz. He's really good at leg kicks, and I think his movement would make Dominic Cruz's movement a little bit worse. Just my opinion. I know people are going to be going at me for that as well, but I do want to say this. Sean O'Malley is pretty underrated. I see everywhere online that Sean O'Malley is extremely overrated. Every single comment. They'll post something about him. Most overrated fighter in the UFC. Man, this guy's overrated. God, O'Malley's overrated. Will you stop overrating this hype train? If every single social media comment is calling a guy overrated, how is he overrated? I've never understood this. No one believes O'Malley is good enough to be a top guy. I don't think he's going to be a championship guy in that division. I really don't. I think eventually he's going to run into a guy who he can't finish, that isn't Pedro Munhoz. He's going to have to go 5 rounds, and they're going to be a Corey Sandhagen, a Piotr Jan, an Aljamain Sterling. They're either going to grapple him and get him out of there like Aljo could, or they're going to be a Piotr Jan or a Corey Sandhagen, and they're going to be too tough for him, and they're going to land some big shots on O'Malley. He's going to start to slow down, and he might get chinned in the later rounds because they're just going to out-tough him maybe. Because from what we've seen in Sean O'Malley's career, he doesn't scream tough guy. Okay? And I feel as though he's pretty underrated. I know he hasn't fought the best of opponents, and that's something that you can say. And Sean O'Malley, oh my God, you took on Chris Matinho. It was a short notice replacement. I know Lewis Smolka is not much of a better opponent in the first place. I completely understand that. But at the same time, Thomas Almeida is a 22-4 fighter. I know he was on a losing streak, and he'd lost to a few opponents here and there. Good opponents like Rob Font, and Thomas Almeida lost to another opponent in Cody Garbrandt as well, and Jimmy Rivera. I mean, he lost to Jonathan Martinez by a close competitive decision before the Sean O'Malley fight, but O'Malley was coming off a loss, and he beat a 22-4 mixed martial artist, a veteran of the game in Thomas Almeida, and scored him, and finished him in the third round. I feel as though he's going to have a really good chance here. Raulian Paiva, 21-3 as a mixed martial artist. He has a win over Kai Kara France. You know? I know he just lost recently to Sergey Morozov, but Sergey Morozov's a dangerous guy himself. Looked good against Umar in the first round, scrambling takedowns. He's got really good grappling, and Paiva was able to stuff takedowns early and rock him all over the place in round one. Fair play, he lost, but in that first round, he was on another level to Sergey Morozov, a respected martial artist in the bantamweight division. And O'Malley schooled Paiva with a broken rib, with one big punch, followed up with some combinations, and got him out of there pretty easily. Highlight reel. You don't make a 21-3 mixed martial artist a highlight reel in the first round with ease, unless you're really, really good. I know that might be shocking to some people. You don't make a 22-4 veteran of the UFC in Thomas Almeida look easy without being somewhat good. He's good. Jose Alberto Quinones was on a bit of a win streak before he took on O'Malley. That's a pretty underrated win to come back to after so much time off. I believe he was on he lost to Nathaniel Wood, but he beat Carlos Huachin, he beat Teruto Ishihara, Diego Rivas, Joey Gomez. He was what in the UFC? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7... 5-2 in the UFC before O'Malley came in and schooled him in the first round with ease. Tough guy. I feel as though O'Malley doesn't get much respect, but I think he's good enough to beat Pedro Munhoz. It's just depending on how he looks this weekend, am I going to pick him to beat the Corey Sandhagens, the Piotians, the guys who he's likely going to be looking to take on next? I don't know if I'm ever going to do that, or a Marlon Vera in a rematch, because likelihood is they're going to be 5-rounders when O'Malley gets to the top of that bantamweight division. They're going to want to try and use his name to headline a fight night, or maybe they keep him on the pay-per-view, and that would be good for O'Malley's career. So if you're Sean O'Malley, you keep taking 3-rounders, because against Marlon Vera in a 3-rounder, you got a much better chance to avoid getting hit with something crazy and rocked, and that's when Marlon Vera does his best work. So the shorter time he spends in the octagon, the better for him. He's got a 3-rounder this weekend. And I think Pedro Munhoz has got good grappling, but it's hard to get a hold of O'Malley. It's hard to get to his hips. He's so quick. And also, Munhoz doesn't really use offensive grappling on opponents. It's all reactionary stuff. He's like Oliveira-ish in that way. You know what I'm saying? Sure, Oliveira's tried to get opponents down, but he's not really good at the double legs and the single legs and the sweeps and the trips to get opponents down to the ground. He'll more hurt you on the feet, wait for you to shoot on him, and then he'll get something on you. Cody Garbrandt sort of went for a takedown to sort of alleviate some pressure, and Munhoz was on his leg and on his neck and trying to get something there. And of course, Rob Font got rocked by Munhoz, dropped by him, shot a takedown, ended up in a guillotine and got subbed. Frankie Edgar shot some takedowns. Munhoz latched up a leg, latched up the head. Edgar never shot a takedown again in that fight whatsoever. Munhoz is a very reactionary grappler. He's more of a jiu-jitsu guy, rather than a wrestler that's going to be able to come forward and get a hold of you and ragdoll you. So I don't see him offensively grappling well against Sean O'Malley. And I can see O'Malley just hurting him enough, swelling up one of his eyes, hurting his leg, hurting him to the body, breaking one of his ribs, something along those lines. And I can see him cruising to a decision win, maybe slowing down a bit in the third round to where Munhoz lands a flurry and everyone goes crazy, and then everyone afterwards is going to say, if it's a 5-rounder, O'Malley loses that fight 100%. And all of this stuff, fighters can't get second wins and stuff like that, but either way, I think that's what's going to go down. 30-27, Sean O'Malley, maybe 30-26, maybe he drops Munhoz in the first and hurts him and is the first guy to drop Munhoz in a while and all of this kind of stuff, or hurts Munhoz to the body. I think if you're looking for an O'Malley TKO, I don't mind the idea of a spinning back kick to the body, or a front kick to the body. Just something along those lines that's going to hurt Munhoz to the stomach, because he's going to be moving forward a lot in this fight with his hands up high to block head kicks and punches and wheel kicks and stuff like that. So if O'Malley spins, he'll be more likely to accept a spinning back kick to the body than a wheel kick to the head. He's not dumb. Keeps his hands very high. Elbows high as well. That body's open. It's a big old torso, mini fridge type build. I think O'Malley could maybe get a TKO with a body spinning kick, or like just a kick to the body in general. He's got very good ones. He landed a lot on Marlon Vera. I just don't see it happening. Munhoz is too tough. But yeah, he's a bit small, isn't he? He's a pretty small guy. I mean, he was looking at a move down to flyweight, in all honesty. O'Malley wouldn't look small against Jose Aldo. He looked quite small against Marlon Vera, but Marlon Vera is like one of the biggest guys for that division by far. Pedro Munhoz could legit make flyweight, and it wouldn't be that bad for him. He was actually considering it before the Dominic Cruz fight. But then they started offering him all these big names and big opportunities, and he's like, okay, I'll stay at bantamweight rather than going down to flyweight and fighting Tim Elliott in my fucking flyweight debut. You know what I'm saying? So they kind of lured him to stay around at bantamweight, but he's a small guy. I don't think he's going to catch O'Malley clean enough to put him away. Even if he does, O'Malley's going to be rolling with it. O'Malley doesn't get caught like leaning into things or rushing into shots like a Yuri Prohaska, who also has a very like flamboyant style on the feet. He's more like an Israel Adesanya type striker, except way better at mixing stuff in and being way more entertaining. I want Sean O'Malley to win. I know some people don't, but every time he fights, it's so fun. It's a crazy fight. It's normally the highlight of the card. I want him to keep going in the bantamweight division, and I think you're a bit annoying to want Munhoz to win this one. Like, get over it, man. He's confident. He likes to braid his hair different colours. He has funny tattoos on his face. Like, I know it's a bit weird at times, but, like, you should want him to win so you can see him against those top names, and then maybe one of those top names beats him, and then that's really cool. Who knows? Sean O'Malley, decision win. Like and subscribe. I'll see you later. Goodbye.